How did you get Gus involved? That's pretty amazing.
I met Gus Van Sant at a conference about a year ago, and I showed my film at this conference trying to educate everybody and tell them what I was up to, and I made sure Gus was there. As soon as I knew he was there, I said, Gus, you've got to watch this movie, tell me what you think. And Gus saw the first cut of Revolution and said he loved it. And I asked him for his opinion, do you have any changes, what would you do to make it better? And he just said, just finish it. And when we had the finished cut of the movie, I sent it to him and said, do you want to get involved? Can you help us change the world? We want to get 1 billion people to see this movie. And he said, yeah, I'm in. And that's it. Off we go.
Wow. You just got back from Victoria, and lo and behold, you get the audience favorite. Now that's a very cool award, because that's obviously telling me that audiences are getting it.
Yeah. Yeah, winning the Audience Choice Awards in Atlantic Canada and in Victoria were amazing, because that shows you that the public likes this movie. It's not just the educational content, but they actually enjoy the experience of the movie. And it's starting to settle in that this is a good film and people like it, and we've got something special here. So it's a bit of a relief, because I spent so long and so much money and so much of other people's money on this movie hoping that it would work. And now that we know it's working and our distributors are all for it and the public's all for it, we're super excited.
So this is the follow-up to Sharkwater, which did incredibly well. What was it that inspired you to go on this journey?
I was inspired to make Revolution because of the journey making Sharkwater. It was glaringly evident to me by the time we were done with Sharkwater that if we wanted to save sharks, we had to save everything. At the movie premiere of Sharkwater in Hong Kong, when we're about to get Sharkwater seen by 120 million people, a woman in the audience puts up her hand and says, why stop us from eating shark fin soup if all the fish are going to be gone by 2048 anyways? Citing studies from Dalhousie University in Halifax and pointing out that if fishing trends continue, we'll have wiped out the entire oceans. And shortly after that, I met a bunch of scientists who said, what you're doing with sharks is cool, but it's not going to matter if we lose all life in the oceans. And it became really clear to me that there's a much bigger problem afoot, and that what we were doing with sharks was just the tip of the iceberg, and that it's now, save the humans kind of thing. So it was really quite simple for me. There was one movie I could make after Sharkwater, one message, one thing I should do, and that was Revolution.
So when you started out, you traveled about 15 countries to make this film. What surprised you the most, or just you were like, wow, because when you did Sharkwater, there were things that cropped up and you were like, just became really exciting and really made the film for you. Was there anything that happened here, same kind of deal?
There were some big surprises in the making of Revolution. One of the biggest surprises was the involvement of kids and youth. We traveled the world looking for conservation movements and the best conservation initiatives, who was jumping in front of bulldozers or blowing up pipelines, and it was kids that weren't blowing up pipelines, but it was kids that were changing the world. It was kids that were fighting these battles, and they were going to bat to fight for their future. And every revolution in the past has been led by the people most directly influenced by the atrocity. And right now, it's kids that have to fight for their future. Adults, are already entrenched in the system in a way. But kids, they don't rationalize their way around any of these problems. They say, okay, we've got to protect our life support system, let's do it. So kids are going to be a massive part of this movement, I think. Another big surprise in the making of Revolution was Canada's involvement in the destruction of our life support system. As Canadians, you think Canada is a great country environmentally. We've got these huge wild spaces. We birthed Greenpeace and the environmental movement. But the truth is far, far different. We are one of the worst countries environmentally, and we're so bad that we get given awards by the environmental community every year for being so destructive and for inhibiting any other country from coming to an agreement to stop climate change and carbon pollution. And it's because Canada's profiting so greatly from the tar sands. And we thought we really needed to bring that into the spotlight and make sure every Canadian knows what's going on and knows, why Canada has made it through the recession the way they have.
That's amazing. So it's been about 10 years since you started to work on Sharkwater. So what keeps you inspired, Rob?
What keeps me inspired is the world changing and the fact that this stuff's working. If we were banging our head against the wall the entire time and nothing was changing, nothing was going right, it would be pretty easy to give up. But every time we turn a corner, there's a new conservation group, a new initiative, a new government policy that's changing, and things are working, and it's going in the right direction. And the more people get educated, the more they do change the world. So it's pretty easy to stay inspired with this. And another thing that started happening when we started working for good and working to save ecosystems and species was that everybody wants to help you. fight for something, and people will align behind you because it's full of meaning, and that gives their lives meaning. It gives you meaning. So that's been a really beautiful process in this.
When did you know that you had something special, that you were working on something really special?
The Toronto Film Festival was a turning point for us, because at that point, that was the first public screening of Revolution, and we had no idea, up till that point, whether it was going to work and whether people would actually like the movie as a journey. And because Revolution has so much information in it, it's 3.5 billion years of evolution, along with all of humanity's, comings and goings. So in Toronto, to get a standing ovation and to, get some audience choice accolades was huge for us, and made us think, okay, we've got something here that will work, not just as a message, but as a movie. We were at the premiere of Sharkwater in Hong Kong, and this was supposed to be the pinnacle of my life. We're about to get this movie that I'd spent so long on, seen by hundreds of millions of people. But at the premiere, it was pointed out to me that our film didn't possibly address the size of the problem, and that there was this much bigger issue afoot, an issue of human consumption, and that we were consuming most of our fish in the oceans. But right after the movie premiere, I got an eye infection in my eye from all the pollution in the air, and actually had to have this sort of gnarly eye operation. And it was a bit of a turning point for me, because I didn't think the air was that polluted. Like, had we really polluted the air so much that I could have to have an eye operation because of it? So it was a bit of a low for me, because one, it was pointed out the last few years of my life meant nothing, and also, I needed to figure out what to do. So after Hong Kong, I sort of retreated and tried to figure out, what was my next move going to be? Like, do I make another movie? Do I take a break? Do I, figure out, where to go?
So when did you decide what your next move was going to be? What happened?
After Hong Kong, I went to Australia and took some time and sort of went looking for land and tried to figure out, do I just retreat and buy some land and grow some vegetables and let society destroy itself on the sides, or do I, go to battle, kind of thing? And I met up with David Hannon, who's an old friend of mine, the guy who taught me how to film underwater, and who's, I lived with in Australia for a year. And he told me about ocean acidification, and told me that there's this massive problem on the horizon that could wipe out everything in the oceans, and that this problem has caused massive extinctions in the past, and that we need to do something about it, and that because I had some power, filmmaking-wise, that I had to do something. And Hannon introduced me to Charlie Varon, the godfather of coral. Charlie's discovered, at least a quarter of all the known coral species. He's the most respected coral scientist in the world, and introduced me to Charlie. And Charlie said, yeah, this is a huge problem. It's not just affecting coral, it's affecting fish, it's affecting phytoplankton, and it's happening so fast, and we've got to do something about it. And so Charlie took me to Papua New Guinea, and I went to Papua New Guinea without video cameras. But Papua New Guinea was a place that I'd always wanted to go to, because there was a fish there, or a cuttlefish in Papua New Guinea, called the Flamboyant Cuttlefish. And about 10 years earlier, I'd been to Malaysia as a wildlife photographer, and I'd met the Flamboyant Cuttlefish. And it's a tiny little creature like that long, walks along the bottom of the ocean, waving its arms around, bright red, and it's so poisonous that it doesn't have to hide, and nothing's afraid of it, or it's not afraid of anything. And it's such a charismatic little creature. So I really hope to see the Flamboyant Cuttlefish in Papua New Guinea. And we went to Papua New Guinea, shot there, walked around with Charlie, learned about the oceans and coral, and did not meet the Flamboyant Cuttlefish.
So then what happened?
Yeah, I put that on hold and thought, okay, we're going to make, we've got to make a movie about this, because this is the most important issue facing humanity, is the fact that the carbon we put into the atmosphere doesn't just stay in the atmosphere, it gets absorbed by the oceans, creating carbonic acid, making the oceans 30% more acidic than they were 100 years ago. And that this increasing ocean acidity could cause an extinction, just like the extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs, and we'd be a part of that extinction. And that's an environmental issue most people don't know about. Most people think climate change is this big environmental issue, but climate change is a symptom of the problem, not the problem itself. A far, far bigger problem is the fact that we could be wiping out most life on Earth. And so the public needed to know that. And that's when I knew we had to make another movie. We had to do something about this. But exactly what the movie would be and how it would take shape, we had no idea. So we pulled together the 10 best writers and conservationists and activists that I knew of, and put them in a house in Toronto for a long weekend, and had a writer's workshop where we basically workshopped the story and the environmental issues and talked about what are the most important issues facing humanity and what are the most aggressive and interesting conservation initiatives tackling these issues, and how could we, create a story arc out of that. So we brought John Cooksey, who's a writer, Jeff Gibbs, who's an executive producer of Bowling for Columbine and Fahrenheit 9/11, and Charles Ford, a permaculture dude, and a bunch of my friends, and all sort of figured out how to tell this story, and we crafted the story of revolution. And it was a really different process because Sharkwater, I just left with a bunch of cameras and made the story. With Revolution, we thought, big picture, what can we make with a $5 million movie in 3D, and what would that look like? And it was a radically different concept for me to do a film that way than it was to do Sharkwater. So we wrote up this movie, we storyboarded it, we crafted it, we wrote up a 26-page treatment and started pitching it and running it around. And it was going to be $5 million. It was going to be entirely in 3D. Looked like we were entirely funded. We were actually doing some shoots in 3D. And then we had an invitation to MC one of the biggest environmental rallies in Canada's history, Fill the Hill, C-Day on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. And so I was spray painted green and throwing my fists in the air and saying, we don't just need environmental policy and Priuses, we need a revolution. And a few days later, all of our money fell away. And so we went from having $5 million to having virtually nothing. But it wasn't nothing, it was virtually nothing, it was just enough. And at the time, cameras were changing dramatically. The cameras we used on Sharkwater cost $100,000. But there were these cameras that were coming out from Canon 5Ds that were like digital SLR cameras, just like the cameras that I used as a still photographer, but digital. And so I already had all these lenses that could work on these cameras. I already know how to work with that style and form factor, and the camera was $3,000. So I figured if I could just buy a couple of these cameras and a backpack and a bunch of plane tickets, maybe I could go and shoot this movie myself. And maybe we don't need 11 people. And at that point, I had to fire everybody at our company, unfortunately, to take the tiny bit of cash that we did have and set off and tried to shoot Revolution.
That's amazing that you don't get deterred. Like you must have had feelings, especially at that point, where you're like, am I going to throw the towel in?
Yeah, it's super discouraging to lose all of your money, for sure. But I think at that point, it was more inspiring for me because working with a larger film budget and more people and more money and production managers and supervisors that are watching the amount of money you spend was really cumbersome. And we were trying to figure out how to land in Madagascar with 11 people and how we'd move 11 people around the country and how we'd move 11 people around China without any permits and how to sneak 11 people into countries for free with no paperwork, and it just wasn't going to happen. So it was almost an opportunity, the fact that we lost the money, to make the movie the way I wanted to make it under no time restrictions, and to not have anyone breathing down my neck telling me this movie should be this way or it has to be the way you wrote it up in the beginning. Because we went entirely over time. The movie took 2 more years than it should have, and we wouldn't have been able to do that unless we were doing it on our own. I was invited to be the judge of an environmental film festival in the Amazon called the Amazonas Film Festival. And this was right at the point where we were getting Rise Again off the ground. Revolution was called Rise Again as its working title. And we were going to get it funded. It was going to be $5 million. It was going to be shot entirely in 3D. So I used the Environmental Film Festival to bring 2 of my buddies down to Brazil to scout for Revolution. So we brought some little cameras and rented a riverboat and went upriver and climbed these giant trees and tried to figure out what was going on in the Amazon and if there was a part of revolution that could be told through the Amazon. And so we had an amazing time. We went to an incredible party. We had a blast ripping around Brazil for like 2 weeks. And then didn't ever end up shooting in the Amazon, however. We ended up finding a way to tell the story without having to shoot Revolution because we got enough rainforest and enough forest footage from Madagascar. Forests are the secondary producer of oxygen on our planet. Phytoplankton produces the most oxygen, little plants in the oceans, but the second biggest producer of oxygen is forests, particularly rainforests. And the biggest producer of oxygen of all the rainforests is the Amazon jungle. Most of the Amazon is in Brazil, but Brazil has been pretty heavily deforesting the Amazon for the last 20 years. And in 2005, Brazil became a net carbon emitter due to drought. So one of the biggest carbon sinks that pulls carbon out of the atmosphere actually started emitting carbon, which shows you that there's tipping points in ecosystems, that the world as we know it doesn't necessarily behave that way all the time, and that we will reach thresholds where, you know, ecosystems will go all the way, you know, all the ice will melt, all the forests will go, sort of thing. So it's a pretty scary stat, and that was one of the reasons why we thought we should go and check out what was happening in Brazil and see what's going on there. And some of my favorite species as a kid and animals that I kept as pets are from the Amazon, like iguanas and mata turtles and anacondas and boa constrictors and rainbow boas all live in the Amazon. So I was super excited about going there.
Cool. Next stop, South Africa.
South Africa. When we ran out of money on Revolution, I had no choice but to sort of lean on friends that I'd met that were filmmakers and that knew some of these locations and knew how to get me into incredible wildlife scenarios. So one of my friends, Julie Anderson, was living in South Africa at the time and knew sharks in South Africa like the back of her hand. So I went to South Africa and sort of leaned on her and got her and her boyfriend to come and shoot a lot of Revolution with me, because I couldn't afford to pay any cameramen. I literally just asked friends to come and shoot. And we went and shot mako sharks and great white sharks and cow sharks. Because Revolution, it's not a film about sharks, but sharks are a pretty significant plot point in the film and in the evolutionary history of life on Earth. So we wanted to get some of the best footage of sharks possible.
Madagascar, what happened there?
Madagascar. It was really important for us in Revolution to get some of the best wildlife footage ever recorded. Because for me, my inspirations, documentary-wise, are BBC films, BBC Nature, Disney nature movies, the Planet Earth. They show you footage and behaviors and animals you've never seen before. And for us, if we want people to go into a movie theater and pay money to see a movie, we wanted to show them some incredible things that they could have not gotten anywhere else. So I had to find some of these animals and some of these behaviors and figure out, you know, what hadn't been shown before. And I'd been to Madagascar as a wildlife photographer when I was 20 and knew where I could get some of these animals and some of these lemurs doing some pretty incredible and funny things. And because we were on such a limited budget, you know, normally as a wildlife photographer, you'd have to go to one place and sit for months waiting for an animal to do something. But I knew exactly where I could go and at what time I could get these certain behaviors in Madagascar. So I sort of retraced my steps and went to the exact same places. And the animals did behave in the way we thought, and they did what we thought they would. And we got a pretty funny scene of shifakas. These shifakas are lemurs, really primitive primates, relatives of ours, that are 75 million years old. And they've got 4 hands, no feet, because they spend all their lives in the trees. But when they get into stressful situations, they're forced to cross land. They have to dance sideways. So they do this really funny dance. And for us, it was a really interesting way of illustrating, you know, what's happening to these species, because their populations are getting fragmented, their habitats decreasing, so they've got to cross roads and cross farmland to get to new areas of forest. And so we thought that would be a pretty beautiful way of illustrating it.
Yeah, that's great footage. That stuff is really cool. Okay, COP16. Sorry.
We got a lot of invitations from youth groups. We were putting out queries to the entire world saying, you know, what's your conservation initiative? Are you doing something cool to protect the environment or species? And some of the best responses we got were from kids and youth. I got invited to MC PowerShift Canada. I got invited to be on the Canadian youth delegation to the UN Climate Conference in Cancun, Mexico, and said yes immediately. And I don't really delve into the political world that much, so this was my introduction to politics 101 through COP16. And to go to COP16, I got my friend Tristan Bayer to come and shoot with me. And both of us went on this crazy 2-week adventure of politics and non-governmental organizations and youth groups getting kicked out of the climate conferences and politicians meeting behind closed doors. And we brought undercover cameras into our meetings with politicians because they wouldn't let us film them. And it was a crazy adventure. But it showed us that there is this massive movement, and that, you know, while the conservation groups sort of have to work within this UN system to get some change, that they're doing it and they're not giving up and they're fighting these battles. And, you know, there were 5,000 people from all across the Americas, poor farmers, showing up for this La Via Campesina protest, which was really inspiring. they were fighting for the rights of Mother Earth, which was a decree from Cochabamba in Bolivia that happened earlier that year after the Copenhagen Climate Conference failed. 50,000 people got together to sign the rights of Mother Earth, putting Mother Nature above and beyond corporations in terms of its political rights. So if you wanted to do something, you had to do it, with Mother Nature in consideration, and that was huge for us. So COP16 was a pretty beautiful moment for us and for the film and for the conservation community, and ended up giving us a bit of a high at the end of the film, because we saw how much effort and how much energy young people are putting into this movement, and knowing that they're gaining power and that they're eventually going to do it.
So you, I think, eventually found your Flambo.
Yeah, we made a rough cut of Revolution, and it was pretty good. Our distributors had seen it, they liked it, and it was working. But it sort of burnt me out making the movie, because I was on it for so long and editing a lot of it myself. And so I needed a break. And right when I needed a break, David Hannon called and said, "We're doing a trip to Papua New Guinea, do you want to come?" And exactly what I needed was freediving and going underwater and holding my breath and hanging out in Papua New Guinea. So I went to Papua New Guinea without really thinking I was going to shoot anything for Revolution. I thought Revolution was done, I'm just editing it. But in Papua New Guinea, I found the flamboyant cuttlefish, and I found the flamboyant cuttlefish laying eggs, and stayed for another month so they could hatch, and got the flamboyant cuttlefish hatching. So this epic wildlife footage of an animal that no one had ever seen before, doing things no one had ever seen before, was ours, and we had the perfect ending to Revolution.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. It's always when you're not expecting things, it's when you brought your camera.
Yeah, exactly.
What's that experience like? You had Sharkwater at TIFF, but this is different. You kind of know you're going into a festival that you're a little comfortable. It's your city, but it must be very agonizing and scary. What was it like for you to take your film there?
The Toronto Film Festival was amazing for us. Toronto's my hometown. I've got a lot of friends here and family here, and so we knew we would have a good screening and an audience that was supportive. And we'd recently got shark fin banned in Toronto because of the fin-free movement, and so there was a lot of support for us and for our conservation initiatives. But it was still nerve-wracking, and no matter what happens, it seems like we're always up against the wall on the deadline, and we're finishing the movie just in time and taking every bit of available time possible to redo the voiceover or make sure the music's great. So we finished the movie just days before it came out at the Toronto Film Festival, which was a little stressful. But the movie premiered, and it was amazing. We had 2 sold-out screenings. Audiences loved it, and we threw an amazing party and had a blast and got to celebrate Revolution's release and that bomb dropping on the world. And because you don't know, we slam the government, we slam corporations, and you don't know, what the reaction is going to be after that, and if people are going to be coming for me or if the government's going to be pissed. But the response was great, and our funding has stayed secure, so I'm pretty thrilled about Toronto.
That's amazing. Was there any kind of negative feedback at all? Not in terms of audience reaction, but just from what you were saying about slamming. It's kind of scary to take that stand sometimes.
Yeah, in a way, Revolution is a little scarier than Sharkwater, because the people that I pissed off in Sharkwater are in Costa Rica. So as long as I stay away from Costa Rica, I'm okay. But the people I'm pissing off in Revolution are here, and they're the most powerful, and they've got the most money, and they control everything. So that's a little scary. I think my phone is tapped. I'm making a film called Revolution. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting step to go out on with this. But it's one that needs to be made. I mean, we need to change everything, right? Like, the world is not working the way it is. We've got to change our system of government. We've got to change our system of growth. We need no pollution. We need, to figure this stuff out, and we're not making plans for any of it right now. So I think it's time to take some bold steps and say, the world needs to change. It needs to change fast, and we've got to do something. Otherwise, the future is pretty grim, right? Like, every time humanity's been put into this situation in the past, they've fought each other, and most of the time ended up eating each other. So we need to do something. It's in our nature, A starving human will kill the last panda to feed his child, or the last other human to feed his child. So we needed to make a big movie that took some bold steps and to tell it how it is, and not, pussyfoot around and say, We need to reduce carbon emissions kind of thing. We need to stop carbon emissions. We need to stop polluting. We need to stop destroying. We built a system of economy and a system of growth that basically destroys the world we depend on for survival. You know, we're consuming it. We're consuming the forests, the trees, the birds, and the bees, and that's not sustainable. And so, you know, what needs to happen in the next few years is sustainability needs to be our mandate. Instead of economic growth, society needs to focus on how do we get society working so that it can continue, because we're going towards a pretty serious consequence, and I don't think people want that. I think if everyone knew what was going on, things would be different. So one of the things that Sharkwater taught us was that all we needed to do was educate people and they would make a better decision. So, you know, it was crazy that people were consuming this soup, and because of that, one of the oldest, longest lasting, most important predators the planet has was going down the tubes. You know, shark populations dropped 90% in 30 years because of shark fin soup. Shark fin soup was $400 a pound, and that's just crazy. And when Sharkwater came out and government policy started changing and conservation groups started popping up and people started saying no to shark fin soup, that showed us, yeah, humanity's good. You know, they will do the right thing. So with Revolution, it was really important for us to educate everybody, because there's no conservation group, there's no government, there's no organization right now that's guiding us to a world that works. It's only going to be our emotions that guide us. You know, we're going to have to be educated so we know engaging in this activity is destructive and engaging in this activity supports human life on Earth, so we'll go for that. You know, it'll be our morals that will guide us and our humanity that will guide us and us holding ourselves and our friends accountable to these things. But we can't do any of that until we're educated. So Revolution's all about educating the people. If people are educated, they'll make better decisions, and once everybody's educated, we can usher in the kind of world that we want. Because it's not, you know, it's not a tiny shift in climate policy that's going to do this. It's not an eco-friendly car. You know, it's not no plastic bags. Although those things are important, it's massive change, big change. And we can only get big change in because we're going to have to change our government and our corporations if everybody forces our governments and our corporations to change. Because the governments and the corporations right now are making money off the way things go. You know, it's incredibly profitable to dig up the oil sands, to cut down trees and sell them to people, to mine out the oceans and sell that stuff. I mean, that is an easy way to make money. So until we start putting some provisions in place that prevent the destruction of our life support systems, we're not going to be able to get there. But that requires pulling power out of the hands of some of the wealthiest people and corporations on the planet that have a lot of power with governments. So it's a big battle we're undertaking, but I think exactly the one that's necessary. And we've got evolution on our sides. We've got 3.5 billion years of it, and we've got kids and their future at stake. So I think we're going to do it. I think we're going to do it in our lifetimes. And I think the challenge, the size of the challenge, is going to call the best in humanity to the height of their potential. People are going to have to step up and, you know, be all they can be and become heroes, and kids that are considering what they want to do with their lives. Instead of becoming doctors and lawyers and secretaries, they can, you know, become heroes and save everything that they love, because just about everything that they love is in jeopardy right now and needs their help. And the path that was sold to them in the Western world and the path that's been sold to us most of this time doesn't work and has caused this problem. So it's young people's duty to go a different direction and figure out a new way to live and a new way of life and a new way to work for good.
You're going to be speaking at National We Day in Ottawa, which is founded by Free the Children's Craig and Mark Kilberger. How did you get involved with this?
I met Mark and Craig Kilberger at We Day in Vancouver. My friend Holly Branson was talking there, so we went out to support her. And I fell in love with We Day and what they're doing. You know, they're educating kids and empowering kids, and kids have to earn a spot at We Day. They don't just get it given to them. So the kids that are there are super active. They're influencers and tastemakers, and they're, you know, changing the world. So for us, that's exactly in line with what we're doing. We're all about educating the kids. So I've been doing everything I can to support Free the Children and We Day, and I'm going to try to figure out many more ways to get Revolution into their hands and support their media. Tyler McLeod has been my best friend since grade 7. We were the first 2 kids in private school with long hair. We were the only 2 kids in private school on the first day with long hair, so we became friends immediately. And Tyler worked with me on the entire PR tour of Sharkwater, traveled everywhere, did all the countries and the movies release and the Cannes Film Festival. The Sharkwater tour was incredible. We went to a dozen countries at least, had some incredible parties, had an incredible time, and, you know, really felt like filmmakers. You know, instead of people that were just putting together a movie, we got to, you know, do the fun side of it and do the movie premieres and stuff. So in making Revolution, Tyler was going to be a part of it from the get-go. And Tyler was on in some sort of producer capacity, associate producer, and was in charge of logistics and helping us figure out shoots, and did the shoot with us in Washington, D.C., and the shoot with us in Ottawa. But when our film ran out of money, we had just enough money for me to buy a couple cameras and some plane tickets and leave, and not enough money to keep Tyler. So unfortunately, I had to let Tyler go, which sucked. And he went off to a job with Virgin, which was pretty cool. But it was a sad moment, the separation. Warren Needler, I met through a mutual friend. I met Warren in Los Angeles, actually. And he was working with a film fund and was interested in helping us find financing for the movie. And I think I showed him where he'd seen Sharkwater and gave him the pitch, the 26-page brochure on Revolution, and said, this is what we're trying to do. We want to make a big movie. This is the numbers, you know. And he said, all right, cool, let's go. We'll help you find some money. So I ran around with Warren for a year, probably, looking for cash, trying to find money, trying to, you know, get a movie called Rise Again funded. And we were successful at one point, and then we're not successful at another point. But Warren stayed on as a co-producer and helped us in post-production and helped us bring the film to the end. Jen Zabawa started out as my assistant, doing everything to keep this crazy life that I had in order, and then ended up as an assistant producer, really helping put together the movie and put together the plan and you know, keep our ship running. And for at least 2, maybe 3 years of Revolution's process, the only employees were me and Jen. And we were the only 2 people working on this movie. And it was me doing the creative stuff and me passing her all of the business side and all of the logistics and emails and stuff. And so Jen was a huge part of making this film. You know, people worked on this movie and gave it everything they had to see it through, because I think they believed in the vision and believed in a better world and thought that this information needed to get out there. So it was probably more stressful and more trying making a film with volunteers and helpers and stuff than it would be making a film with a strict budget and all that. But it was amazing. We did it, and we can do it again. And it taught me how to make movies cheaper, actually. Sharkwater was $2 million. Revolution was $1 million, but it looks like $5 million. So I think as we go, I'm figuring out how to do this myself. I own the equipment now. I've built the be-all and end-all of editing systems. We've got the best speakers in the world, the best microphone in the world, the best computer in the world. So we can make these movies consistently and never need to rent anything and never need to buy anything from anybody again. So we sort of built a studio in a way, which has been a huge learning process for us, but pretty beautiful because now we know we can make more of these movies. Jim Sherry from D Films is a family friend of ours. His cottage is next to my family's cottage in Muskoka. And so we see a lot of Jim and talk to him a lot. And when Jim was at Alliance Atlantis and they had a great success releasing Sharkwater, we knew we wanted to work with Jim on Revolution. And Jim started his own distribution company called D Films. So our distributor for Revolution had to be D Films. And we needed a distributor to believe in this movie at the very beginning for us to get any money. If we didn't have one person buying in, then we wouldn't have got financing from the television side or financing from the government or financing from any other of our financiers. So the fact that D Films was in from the get-go, they were going to distribute it, they were going to pay for it, they were going to put it out in theaters, made a huge difference to us making this movie. In fact, we probably wouldn't have been able to make it in even remotely the same fashion if we didn't have D Films on. So they were fantastic. It was really important for us in Revolution to get an incredible soundtrack. So instead of getting a composer to make the music for the movie, we went to a bunch of different artists and got them to contribute their music to the movie. And so the music is a bit of an eclectic mix. There's some from Africa, a bunch from Europe, some from Australia. But it's given Revolution a cool vibe, because we wanted it to be young and hip and interesting and not sound like a normal documentary. It's got to be big. It's got to have some big tunes in it. And so we've got Moby in it, and it became a pretty beautiful soundtrack in the end. Filming underwater is radically different than filming on land. Underwater, everything moves, so you're never really stuck to the bottom. Every time you breathe, the camera moves. Every time your heart beats, the camera moves. So you've got to find a way to stabilize it against something. Little cameras underwater are terrible because every time there's a little bit of a wave or something, the camera moves, and on a giant screen, that's terrible. So you want the biggest camera possible underwater. The first cameras we used on Revolution were nicknamed Feather because they were 100 kilograms. Giant, giant cameras. They were super steady. If you wanted to make a turn, they did one giant Steadicam sort of turn. And we ended up using another smaller camera, which was easier to free dive with and easier to move around. Filming the Flamboyant Cuttlefish required a lot of patience because animals aren't used to people being around them underwater. They're not used to valves and bubbles, and almost nothing underwater makes bubbles unless it's super dangerous, like a dolphin, if you're a cuttlefish. So to make sure the cuttlefish was used to us, I had to spend a day underwater just hanging out with the cuttlefish, watching it do its thing, watching it eat, and then slowly it got comfortable enough with me that it started to lay eggs underwater. And that's a pretty beautiful thing, that a creature has become so comfortable with you, it's fine to be entirely vulnerable and start laying eggs. And that was incredible. And you need some pretty special lenses to shoot underwater. The Flamboyant Cuttlefish eggs are like that big. So to get close-up and wide-angle looking stuff, you need incredibly long probe lenses. We had to put them inside coconuts. It was pretty amazing, but we ended up getting some footage that we're super excited to show the world. So Dave Hannon is one of my best friends and one of the best underwater cameramen in the world. Dave's footage is always super steady. He's got giant cameras, and if his cameras aren't big enough, he attaches stuff to them. So they're like this big underwater. So when they move through the water, they move with such grace, and it's perfect for giant screens. So when we were shooting Revolution, the only person underwater that we could really count on for the best was David Hannon. And so he shot all the underwater tropical stuff with us. Everything that happened around the equator was Dave Hannon. Dave Hannon on reefs in Papua New Guinea. He shot me freediving with Manta Rays. That was a pretty interesting thing. Manta Rays they can be 27 feet wide. They're huge, and they're relatives of sharks that have just evolved to filter plankton by filter feeding. And they've got sensors all on the underside of their body, just like sharks, that detect electromagnetic fields, so they can feel you if you're excited or you're scared. And so freediving with manta rays, you've got to be really calm. I mean, they are not predators. They flee from predators. So it took a while. It took us like a day of freediving, of just hanging out and trying to sneak around and hang out with mantas till they were comfortable enough to be swimming amongst and around me. We thought that would be a pretty cool scene in the movie. Paul Wildmon is another cameraman that we worked with in Revolution. He's an underwater cameraman and a graphic designer, and he shot me freediving with sharks in Alawai Shoals in South Africa. Sharks are incredibly sensitive. You think that they're aggressive, man-eating monsters, but they're hypersensitive. Sharks have 2 more senses than people do. So they can sense electromagnetic fields, they can feel movement in the water, and when you're hanging out with them, if you're excited or you're scared or you move too fast, they'll flee, and they might not come back. So for us filming sharks, it takes quite a bit of time. You've got to spend the day doing it, make sure that the animals are comfortable with you, and Paul was there for all of that. Sean Heinrichs is an underwater cameraman, and he shot the saipan scene and the whale shark scene with me. One of the most heartwarming things that happened to us in the making of Revolution was, hearing from kids that had seen our previous movie, Sharkwater, and started doing something about it. And we thought that would be a really beautiful way to tie in the fact that people are changing the world. This is a positive movement. There is a lot of hope. There's more going right than there is going wrong, and that we will turn this around. Kids believe it to be so, so it will be so. This is the issue on the planet right now. There's not a bunch of different issues that we should be focusing on. Our life support system is in jeopardy, and this could mean the demise of our species this century. We've got to do something about it. You need to know this stuff. But there's a lot of vested interest against you knowing this, because the status quo and the way the world works is immensely profitable. So I think we have a giant task ahead of us, but we've got to get educated. People need to know what's going on. They need to know who's doing devastating things on this planet, so we can start engaging in different governments and engaging in different corporations. And I think that's hugely important. Revolution could anger a lot of people and a lot of important, powerful people that are making money off the way the world works. So I think there could be quite a bit of controversy when the movie comes out, and I think it's really important for people to see this movie so they get it from the horse's mouth and don't just listen to what the media says, because this could create a bit of a stir. I mean, it's going against a lot of what's going on the planet right now. A lot of the biggest corporations, a lot of the biggest governments, we're slamming them, and so, you know, they need to change, and we want the entire world to know that they need to change. I hope people come away from Revolution with a love of life, because it's life on this planet that gives us our food, our water, and our air, and it's that life that we're destroying by the civilization and the consumption and the activities that we're engaging in. But the reason why we love these animals, these species, these tigers, these lynx, the lemurs, is because they're amazing and we depend on them for our survival. So I hope people come away from Revolution with a renewed love of life, and I hope that that love helps people go to bat to fight for the ecosystems that we depend on for survival.